Well, I'm just thinking we might make a bit of a start here. Got a few people still joining by the looks of it, but just past the hour here, so on our start time. So, Said, what do you think? Let's make a start, I think.
Yep, I think, yeah.
Okay, good. I'll probably start out by welcoming everybody to this webinar. So we're here to present some information about a Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre project, which revolves around development of a code of practice for aquaculture vessels in the Australian waters. So I'll run through a few introductory slides myself, and then I'll pass over to Said. Probably just to start with around housekeeping as you're all joining. Maybe just get you to put yourself on mute unless you're wanting to speak. And we'll, if you've got any questions during the session, probably suggest either pop them into the chat. Said, we've got that. Do we have that functionality actually?
Yes,
Chat
I
function
think
there?
so, yep.
Yeah, okay. And or hold them till the end of the presentation, where we're going to spend a fair bit of time questions and answers sort of workshop at the end of the presentation. So I guess let's get underway. Said, I'll get you to move to the next slide, please. So this is the agenda for today's presentation. Again, yeah, thank you all for joining. Thanks for showing the interest and for your valuable time. So we'll spend about 20-25 minutes presenting, showing a slide pack here, which Said's controlling. We'll go through introduction to myself and Said to start with, and the other core team members in this project. I'll introduce a little bit about the CRC itself for those who aren't aware. Introduce the project, and then Said will go through some more details in terms of the development of this draft code of practice document, and then we'll save the last half of the hour for any questions which the audience may have, and a little bit of a general discussion about the development of this code, and then we'll wrap up after that. So go for the next slide, please, Said. All right, so just to introduce presenters. So we have myself, Chris Shearer from BMT, and Said Mohadjer Nasab from AMC, UTAS, University of Tasmania. Other core team members, a couple of my colleagues from BMT, including Andrew Harris and Nick Tye, and then Said's colleagues from Australian Maritime College, Chris Chin and Naji Abdusami. So they're probably the core project team. A little bit about BMT. I'll just say, just firstly, just a little bit about BMT. So we're a marine-oriented consultant, around about 1,300 professionals worldwide, and we operate in Americas, Asia, Australia, and Europe. And then about AMC, University of Tasmania, for those who are unaware. So the Australian Maritime College is a National Institute for Marine Education, Training and Research. And that's where Said has completed his PhD, and then this postdoctoral project that we're going to present today. Okay, next slide, please. So a little bit about the Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre. So there's 44 partners. The logo is listed on the screen here. Basically the CRC was established in 2019. So Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre. It's mostly funded, or it's part of the Australian government's CRC program, It has a 10-year lifespan, so we're say 4 odd years into the program now. Brings together these 44 partners ranging from industry, government, and research, from a number of countries as well, and with a focus upon marine renewable energies, maritime engineering, environmental assessment, policy and regulation. Next slide, please, Said. So this project, the Code of Practice for Aquaculture Vessels, these are the project partners. So we have BMT, University of Tasmania, TASAL, DNV, University of Queensland and Oysters Tasmania, and then as a project observer, the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, AMSA. Okay, so a little bit of an introduction to the project. So by way of background, there was a scoping study project commissioned by the BECRC in 2020, which was titled Aquaculture Vessel Requirements Scoping Study. So there was a number of elements to that project, and one of the findings or recommendations at the end of that project was that there could be an opportunity to develop a set of guidelines or a code of practice pertaining to aquaculture vessels, given some of the work that was done in that scoping study with AMSA. That was, I guess, a flow-on project, which is now eventuated in this body of work that we're going to present today. In terms of, say, the purpose of the code of practice, so it's aiming to provide guidance for planning, building, surveying and operating vessels in the aquaculture sector within Australia's exclusive economic zone. So why develop a code specifically? It's intended to provide guidance to address some of the specific challenges that we know exist in the aquaculture sector, in particular with the vessels and the operation of those vessels. So there was a few questions that were asked in the lead up to this webinar. So we actually posted a few FAQ questions and responses onto the website, which you may or may not have seen. We can go through some of that later, but there were some questions around what does the code address, which is not already covered in current regulations? The answer is some of the specific topics in the aquaculture sector, such as health and safety, regulatory classifications, safety challenges during offshore transitions, food safety management, and the health and welfare of live animals during transport. So that's sort of some of the background. We can go into a bit more detail around some of those other questions as well. And I suppose lastly here on this slide, just in regards to the status, the project has prepared a draft code of practice document, which we're currently seeking feedback, including via this webinar and other mechanisms. It's very clear that adherence to the code of practice is stated to be voluntary. So the document is treated as a voluntary guideline, aiming to help the industry and not provide or put up sort of red tape and barriers, so to speak. This is really supposed to be a useful document, which would be voluntary in nature. Okay, so that's probably all from me from an introductory perspective. I'll hand over to Said to progress with some of the main content of the presentation, and then I'll jump back at the end to go through the Q&A session. Thanks. Said, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I'm Said, the research assistant for this project. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the project, how we initiated, and the process we went through to complete it. In terms of the aquaculture industry, we try to engage with three main aquaculture industries: the finfish, shellfish, and the relatively new industry, the seaweed. And also in terms of the aquaculture vessels, there are three main categories of vessels that we looked into. Feed barges, which transport feed to the pens, wellboats or live fish carriers, which transport fish between different pens and from the shore side to the pens as well. And service vessels, which are regular and day-to-day operational vessels. So this project consists of 5 different phases. The project began in March 2022 and is set to finish in March 24, spanning 2 years. We started with phase 1, which was the literature review, and involved a desktop-based review of existing guidelines and research studies around the aquaculture vessels. Phase 2 of the project had 2 parts focused on stakeholder engagement. In part 1, involved interviewing various aquaculture sectors, and in level 2, we reviewed past incidents related to aquaculture and conducted a risk assessment. Building on these 2 phases, phase 3 aimed to identify gaps and challenges in aquaculture vessels. The identified gaps and challenges were categorized into 5 main groups: design and operation, regulation, safety and training, food management, and live animal welfare. Then, based on the findings, draft guidance for the code of practice was created. The draft underwent feedback sessions with interviewees and also AMSA. This current workshop sort of serves as part of these intended feedback sessions, and the draft version that you have is an updated version of the phase 4 draft. It is still a work in progress with some additional refinements needed before finalizing the guidance. Now I'm going to walk you through some of the details of these phases and what we did in those. So for phase 1, the literature review started March 2022 until July 22. During this period, we examined various regulation, guidelines, and research studies. The guidelines included national Australian standards and rules, such as NSCV, National Standard for Commercial Vessels, Marine Orders, the Uniform Shipping Law Code, and also AMSA exemptions. And as part of the international regulations, we reviewed DNV rules, specific guides for aquaculture vessels from ABS, some of new IMO resolutions, some oil and gas guidelines, especially those related to operations like crane operations and crew transfer vessels. The IMCA guidelines for particularly for towing operation, and also best aquaculture practice for animal-related sections. The literature review also contained research studies, especially those conducted in Norway at SINTEF and NTNU, which focused on exposed aquacultures and their vessels. We also looked into some related topics such as crew transfer vessels, bunkering, and alternative fuels. The outcome of this literature review was published and presented at the OME conference in June 23 in Melbourne. And if you want to see the full paper, I would send a link after this workshop with the recording, so you can you can check out the literature review and also that paper. Then the second phase of the project, so part 1 was the stakeholder engagement, which started in May 22 and until February 23. We focused on 4 different aquaculture sectors: authorities, designers, operators, and researchers. In total, we interviewed 13 individuals representing 8 different organizations and companies. included AEX Group and Green Aqua from Chile, AMC Search, AMSA, BMT UK, DNV Norway, Oyster Tasmania, and Tassal. In the second part of the phase 2, we did an incidents review. We examined fishing vessel incidents reported in the monthly AMSA website from 2018 to 2022, totaling of 167 incidents. Should mention that these incidents were categorized as fishing vessel incidents, but since at the moment aquaculture vessels also classified as fishing vessels, we still included them in our assessments. With some of these incidents, we could specifically identify they are aquaculture incidents, but for others, this distinction was not really clear. But again, given the close relationship between the aquaculture and fishing industry, we still included them in the risk assessment. So the incidents included various types, ranging from minor operational issues to some more severe accidents, resulting in property damage, personal injuries, or even loss of life. Phase 3 of the project involved a gap analysis. We identified in total 5 challenges from the interviews, and categorized them into those 5 different groups that we had. So, for example, for design and operation, some of the key challenges raised during the interviews were compatibility of interactions between vessels and pens, crew transfer procedure, safety and designing efficient path for crew transfer, coordinating different operations happening simultaneously, the specific design purpose of the vessels, and stability during operations. In the regulation category, separating fishing vessels from aquaculture vessels was the main thing that raised during the interviews. Defining industrial personnel or special personnel for the aquaculture crew who are transferring to and from sites, and differentiating them from passengers. Establishing underwater regulations for divers, developing specific service notations for aquaculture vessels, and also distinguishing regulations for larger and smaller types vessels. Regarding the safety and training, so the primary issue was slips, trips, and falls, which constituted the majority of our incidents. Risk management for operations such as rope handling and crane operations. Need for specific aquaculture certificates was suggested, separate from fishing vessel certificates, and also we had some concerns about assets and equipment contacting each other. In the food management category, so the use of blockchain for tracking products was suggested, maintaining a continuous cold chain from harvest to market. Ensuring food is free from contamination, particularly on vessels, and also establishing standards and best practices for food safety and management. And in the live animal welfare category, several parameters require monitoring, including ammonia, carbon dioxide, oxygen, salinity, water temperature, and animal density, especially during transport. So this pie chart that you see here is deduced from risk assessment. So we can see the relationship of the challenges that we have raised during the interviews and the incidents that we review. So you can see sort of nearly quarter of the incidents are related to slips, trips, and falls, which is a major concern, also frequently mentioned by operators during the interviews. It's evidently one of the most significant hazards in aquaculture. And then 22% around attributed to stability issues. These issues, the stability issues, are related to stability during operations. sort of the importance of dynamic stability and sea motion rather than static stability. And we have other challenges such as the high sea states that the operators are facing, and also the same assets contacting with each other is also a major part of the incidents. We published this phase, the gap analysis phase, and we presented it at IMC conference in November 2023. I will also send you a link afterwards to in order for you to check out this phase and the outcome of this paper and this phase. Then the phase 4. So based on all of this, we have an overall map of the guide we are proposing. It consists of 8 different chapters at the moment. So the first chapter focuses on scope, definitions, and applications. Chapter 2 covers structures and stability. Chapter 3 is systems and components, essentially the machinery parts of a vessel. So in these 3 chapters, we reference existing NSCV USL codes and AMSA exemptions and marine orders, plus some of the IMO resolutions. We also brought in some notes and guides from ABS guideline for aquaculture service vessels and the DNV rules for high speed and light crafts. And also we included some of the MLC, Maritime Labour Convention rules in that as well. Chapter 4 is around aquaculture operations. We focus on the different operations, different significant operations, including towing, lifting, crane operations, net cleaning in this chapter. And we referenced and brought in some notes from existing similar guidelines from similar industries such as oil and gas and offshore wind guides regarding crane operations, lifting, hoisting, towing, and as well as some work health and safety requirements. Chapter 5 considers electrical control and monitoring systems, and Chapter 6 is surveys and certificates. Again, same for Chapter 1 to 3. It's based on NSCV, USL, and AMSA exemption with some standards and rules from some references from to code regs as well. And then Chapter 7 and 8 focus on food safety management and fish welfare, processes, policies, factors, strategies, and certifications regarding these 2 items are based on the food standards Australia and New Zealand, and also the best aquaculture practice guides. There are some notes regarding this code of practice Chris mentioned earlier in the beginning of the presentation. So this is going to be a voluntary code. We are not trying to introduce new rules and regulations. Our aim is to assist the industry, specifically when they are moving offshore and expanding to more offshore locations. They will have a guide in terms of what to expect and what they need to be aware of when going offshore. And also we aim to identify and address the challenges and the gaps within the industry and collaborate more with the industry and the government. The next steps of this project, so it is due to be completed by March 24. Following the completion, it will undergo a review by AMSA for potential consideration or adoption as sort of deemed to satisfy pathway. And then depending on the outcome of that review, there might be a need for spin-off projects to revise and update the existing code. So the ultimate goal is to create a comprehensive guideline for use by authorities, industries, and all the stakeholders at different stages. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll open the floor. I'm happy to answer all the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Saeed. Yeah, I can certainly jump in now, and yeah, thank you for all your hard work, and thanks for the presentation, Saeed. Yeah, I'd like certainly open the floor if there's any say specific questions that anyone might have had as we were going through the presentation there. Yeah, please jump in if there's any specific questions, or alternatively any other general comments from the audience. Yeah, at this point.
Chris, I might just jump in for a quick one. I'm Angelo from the AMC Search. Are we able to get a copy of this presentation emailed to us after it concludes today?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Angelo. Yeah, I think so. Our plan, correct me if I'm wrong, Saeed, we would send out a bit more information to the audience, including some of these links Saeed mentioned to the IMC paper and the OMA paper. Saeed, we can bind this presentation up and send that out at the same time, I think, as well.
Yes, so the recording and I think the presentation itself will be available after a workshop, probably in a couple of days, just to, yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And certainly, yeah, keen for the distribution to be, sort of as wide as possible. If there's any colleagues or any persons who might be interested in the topic, yeah, feel free to pass it on. And yeah, we're definitely keen to get any further feedback from anyone in the broader industry.
So, if I may, Daniel Casement from the Southern Bluefin Tuna industry.
Hi, Daniel.
A really good collation of information and resources, and excuse my naivety, this might be something that salmon or some other industries are looking for, but as outlined and as from reading it, most of this information is available, and so I'm just a little bit lost on where the real purpose is. Is this a training document and a basis for training, or is this a code of practice? What is it, and what's the real purpose? We've got codes, we've got information, and there are mandatory training requirements for many of our deckhands and many of our workers. So, I guess a lot of us have seen codes of practice like this, which are done with the very best of intent, and they're voluntary. And if industry jump on board, because they are oftentimes good things to do, some of them might end up in legislation, and we've with the duplicate that was something else, or at industry wondering why we've duplicated something again.
Yes, great question. Sort of breaking up there a little bit at the end, Daniel, and yeah, thanks a lot. I think it does go back to sort of the initiation of the project. I think probably to answer your question, it was seen as what could be a useful guide to help the industry in a sense, particularly if and when the sector is moving into areas maybe with higher risk, such as further offshore, maybe bigger vessels. So I suppose looking to the future as aquaculture in general expands, but also maybe takes on other risks, we saw that there was an opportunity at least to collate existing knowledge, as you've said, existing documentation that already exists into a cohesive sort of single point of information or of references, so to speak, which this has done, and picked up some gaps or say information or less than ideal amount of information that might be in a particular topic that we've been able to provide further guidance upon. As to if such a code would maybe enter into legislation, say for instance, I don't really think that's the intended pathway. It could only ever be a deemed to satisfy sort of approach, but only if AMSA were to approve it in that fashion. So right now it's really sitting as a voluntary code, only.
So then I'd ask why we go to AMSA with a deemed to satisfy. What's our purpose?
Yeah, fair question. I guess sort of hitting the limit of my ability to answer your question well. So I can defer to either Said if you've got
I'm
any
happy
opinions.
to catch up separately.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be negative, but I'm just trying to think about where it fits and
Yep.
And make sure that we are alert to where it fits in amongst everything else. I guess that's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah, very good question, and very important to have that fairly clear. I agree. Yeah. So I don't know if you wanted to comment first, yeah.
I think you mentioned everything. Yeah. So the first step, why we did the code of practice, we sort of looked into the future a little bit. We are seeing that specifically the aquaculture industry is gradually moving towards more offshore locations, and with existing regulations, and this might be very hazardous and very risky in the future. So what we try to do here is sort of giving the industry a note that there might be risk with current fleet that you've got. It's going to be a very dangerous and risky industry, so you need to be prepared for offshore locations, and also gather everything that we have at the moment, gather it in one specific document that when later on when the industry is sort of hoping for example, a different class of vessels specifically for aquaculture vessels, then this code of practice will come in place and specifically can address all the issues from design to operations and everything in one coherent guideline. Yes, what you say is correct. At the moment, this code of practice is only addressing and also gathering all the information that we currently have. There's nothing specifically new in it. The new parts came from other similar industries. There might not be some aquaculture specific sort of guides, but they are similar. So gather everything in one document, and as the industry try to move offshore, and we find the risk associated with that, we can update this code of practice and this guide, so in order to have a more suitable, more optimal designs, and also, as you mentioned, for training purposes as well, can be used. It can add more training sections into that, so in order for the crew to be trained accordingly, so that can be the purpose of that. So yeah, what you say is correct. At the moment may not be really applicable, but we looked sort of into the future, and we hope that it would become a useful guidelines in a few years' time.
Yeah, thanks, Said. I think it's a very good question though, Daniel, and maybe something that we may even, if you had time, we may wish to catch up sort of separately and discuss a little further, actually. So that's, there's a few other questions coming in which I can maybe put to you, Said, as well. So
Chris, Chris, it's Joe Marshall here, and I can't put my hand up. There's something weird going on with my mobile.
Go ahead, Joe.
So Joe Marshall from Seafood Industry Australia. I look after the Sea Safe safety program in the industry, and I'm guessing there's no one from AMSA online. So I just thought I'd also respond to all of you and Daniel to say that I think, from my perspective, whilst there's risk of these things becoming legislated in a way we don't want, I think that the strategic direction of organisations like AMSA and others worldwide is recognising that we're going to get better uptake if we have an industry-led program, and therefore they're looking for more, I guess, guidelines and codes of practices to help them, help them in terms of getting to the place that they want to get without necessarily having tight legislation around it. So I see this as something that actually helps us as a sector avoid becoming, the victims of legislation that is very narrow and doesn't enable us to grow in the way that Saeed's been talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Good perspective on it. I guess that's sort of our view as well. I might also mention, let's say, another example of development of a code of practice, which we also used in part as a reference, probably just the beginning of this project. There was another code of practice developed for autonomous vessels, for instance. Yeah, so that was a good, say, a template or at least sort of pro forma around what the kind of thing that can be developed into a code of practice. And I guess for more context, that document has also been, let's say, published in a sort of final format, but is now actually undergoing another project to reiterate that particular code of practice. So it's also working with AMSA on that reiteration. So yeah, we see there's other examples of sort of what we're doing here, all with the intention of helping the industry and not adding additional sort of red tape to it. So thanks, Joe. Just in the chat, I might jump over to the chat if that's okay. There's and Saeed, can you see that as well? There's a Kevin earlier question from Kevin a bit earlier on in regards to chapter 8, maybe specifically about animals, non-fish species. Do you want to maybe respond to that?
Yeah. So that was sort of my mistake. Yeah, it is animal welfare. Particularly at the moment, what we have is finfish and shellfish. We still don't have anything related to seaweed and kelp. But we're trying to get some more information about those. So yeah, that would be around animal welfare and finfish and shellfish.
So potentially a definition thing, maybe the phrase animal might be perhaps misleading. Okay. So in a sense, Kevin, if that answers your question, that's the scope. Finfish, shellfish, probably a gap there regarding kelp, but so it's chapter 8. Kevin had a second question there. Any focus upon aquaculture for restoration purposes? I can probably answer that, and it's not really. The focus of the code is particularly on the vessels which service the aquaculture sector. So not even particularly on the aquaculture operations themselves. So it's not touching upon fish pens, mooring systems. It does discuss or include references to the feed barges in the salmon industry, because they are in part a vessel. So hopefully that's any further comments on that, Saeed, or have I answered Kevin's questions there? Yeah, okay.
I've got a quick question if you've got a chance.
Yeah, please, Mike.
Yeah. Mike Priestley from O&A Marine. I tend to concur with what Daniel said. Obviously, AMSA, going back to AMSA, can help you with any conflicts. So that's the obvious support there. But I sort of beg the question, if it's industry driven and it meets the approach that Joe is suggesting, which I think is good and proactive, then you probably don't need AMSA so much, but it's good to have their input. In addition, one thing that strikes me in my initial review of this is that at the bigger end of the range, the big boats identified in your pictures and fisheries, they seem to be well taken care of with codes and standards. For me, it's the smaller boats, being an operator and amongst other things. It's the small boats and the delta in the need for stability books, the need for safe operations. AMSA just use a safety management system to cover everything. The reality is there's more obligations than that aren't adequately covered by legislation, etc. That's just my comment, and I think there's room to breathe into that space and provide additional guidance that's not offered by AMSA, it's not offered by the codes, etc. In addition, in general, with the guidance, it's going to be about what attracts operators to pick up on this and say, this is how we operate. This is what we get at. And, you know, obviously there has to be a quid pro quo. You know, we operate by this guidance, therefore, you know, we should get favourable reception from regulatory authorities, etc. If that makes sense, that's my two bobs.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I agree with your sentiments. Said, yeah, did you have any comments there on Mike's?
No, yeah,
actually,
that's a good point, and that's something what we try to more focus on to smaller vessels, specifically to DCVs and specifically smaller vessels less than I said a 15 meters vessel, because those are the ones that they have the more incidents and everything. Yeah, as mentioned, the bigger boats that they have more regulations to comply with, so they have this less risk specifically associated with them. But yeah, as mentioned, a lot the smaller boats are probably the bigger issues. That's why we try to include some of the DNVs around the light craft, some of the stability criteria for from IMO for smaller boats, in order for the designers and for the operators to design at least based on a set of regulations, rather than trying to sort of not cut corners, but trying to make it less optimal, and trying to be a bit on the cost side of it, rather than to try to reduce the cost, rather than to sort of play around with the rules. So yeah, smaller craft, smaller vessels are probably the bigger issues in aquaculture. And specifically my own point of view, because we went and we did some site visit, and we saw how these smaller boats operate. So it said the more hazards and risk associated with those than the big ones. My own perspective is actually what I really try to be more focused on in this code of practice is that small vessels.
And say it may be worth mentioning that certainly the larger vessels are typically covered by the sort of international classification.
So based on AMSA, anything above 35 is, so we need an RO recognized organization, so it goes to a classification society, so they are okay. Anything less than that, specifically the day-to-day regular work boats at 10-12 meters, those ones are have more risk associated with them.
All right, thanks, Michael. I'll jump to another question in the chat here. C. Nolan. So thanks for the presentation, noting that biosecurity controls and procedures are briefly addressed. The spread of disease agents and diseases is mentioned, but nothing regarding best practice biofouling management of vessels. Okay, yep. To mitigate the risk for transfer of invasive pests and species. Yes, I'd probably agree that the topic of biofouling management is not really covered at the moment. So yeah, that's a fair point.
It is, the thing is, we so all of us, we're sort of engineers, we don't really have the background of those. So it would be a great help if you can provide us with some guides, or if you can point us to a direction that we can look into in terms of that. We're definitely happy to include that in the code of practice.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Let's just have a look here. So Daniel, so another comment here in the chat. Norway has this salmonoid handling code of practice, but not combined with vessels guidelines. Say that's true. I guess we should mention ABS, as say you mentioned. So American, they do have that specific aquaculture vessels guideline, which we have used in references. The Norway, Said, are you aware of that document that Daniel's mentioning?
I'm not aware of that. Maybe I've seen it. If I probably, yeah. But regarding Norway, I received an email just today that they are also working on sort of a similar code of practice, specifically for their exposed location operations. And so yeah, it's sort of a very similar research is also going in Norway for their exposed aquaculture as well. So that could be something we
and do you think that includes vessels as well, Said?
Yeah, that could influence some mooring, like installing mooring and with vessels. Yeah.
Okay. Daniel, what was don't know if you wanted to come off mute, but was there a specific document you actually had in mind that you may be able to direct us to?
I've just sent the Norwegian link.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. All right. Yeah, much appreciated. Yeah, we'll take a look at that. Thank you. Let me just keep moving through. I can open up if there's anyone who wants to come off mute with any other questions. Otherwise, I can keep going through the chat. Still a couple of comments there. Okay, so I might move on to so Justin. It's the next question. So comment. So thanks, Justin. I think it's a good starting point as a consolidated code. However, if it was going to be used in the future for more regulatory purposes, then it needs to consider the needs of established sectors such as pearling, that have significant offshore vessel use. Yes, very good point, Justin. And I suppose, in thinking this through, that there's say a pathway from, say, a code or let's maybe call it a guideline, from a set of guidelines or set of resources is one thing, which is really where this is up to now, versus if it was to progress further into some sort of consideration via AMSA, whether that next step is needed, necessary, or wanted by the industry. That's a fair question. One way or the other, though, we would be really keen to get other parts of the aquaculture sector, sort of their views and contributions to this code. So, Justin, certainly, if there's any inputs your sector could provide, or the pearling sector, we did we did make some attempts, I think, early on in the piece to try to get some points of contact in such industries, unsuccessfully, unfortunately. So Justin, I guess if you're a point of contact, we'd be keen to have a discussion with you, perhaps separately. Say anything further on Justin? Okay. So looks like a comment just from Joe, thanking us. Daniel, got your link there, thank you. And Andy Harris from BMT, thanks Andy. I don't know, Andy, do you want to come off mute maybe and speak to your comment question there, Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, so just picking up on a couple of the earlier points raised, and fully understand the discussion around the fact that AMSA already largely cover the vessels, and that there is quite a lot of statutory regulation out there already. The purpose of this code of practice as a voluntary code really needs to be industry driven. It needs to be of value to industry, and we understand that from our side of having been involved in the development thus far. The point I'm just making is, I think really Chris was saying earlier, with comparison to the autonomous vessels code that AMSA have been involved in, not everything that AMSA does as an activity is about statutory regulation. They do have a role to play in best practice and voluntary compliance as well, and they're funded to do that. So if this code of practice is to endure, what other methods would there be to manage and look after it for the long term? Is AMSA actually the best placed organisation to do this, or is there an industry body that could take on that role? It's just a point for discussion that I was wanting to raise.
Yeah, very good point, Andy, and we probably haven't sort of debated such a question too much yet in this project, but I think it's a very valid question, yeah, maybe one for us to further consider, I think, Andy, in the next stages, next steps. Okay, let me just keep going here. Jay Knowles, so I have a couple more specific comments re biosecurity and animal welfare. Yeah, would you like to come off mute perhaps and go ahead and ask those? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm Jasmine Knowles. I'm the veterinarian for human aquaculture. So yeah, I think the comments to this point have been more broad, but I do have some maybe more detailed or specific questions relating to the live fish side of things. And as I'm sure you guys all know, the companies will have their own individual protocols for managing fish health and biosecurity and all those sort of things internally at a farm level. So it's just making sure that this code is the right place to go into detail about particularly the welfare side of things. I think it's important that we acknowledge that those need to be considered. But I do note there are some quite specific things mentioned in that final section of the code that they quote specific temperature ranges and stocking densities. And I'm not sure that they're going to be relevant for the range of species the code is trying to capture. So my hopefully constructive feedback would be, if you want to maintain a welfare aspect to this, that it can't be so prescriptive.
Yeah, very good point, Jasmine. I kind of had the same thoughts myself, actually. Yeah, so I think you're right in that it probably shouldn't have such specifications in this document. It should be a little bit more general and ensure that it's suitable for, say, multiple species as well, right? We don't want this just to be maybe just have parameters that are satisfactory for salmon, but they're not appropriate for others. So yeah, I think point taken. So did you want to comment upon that, and maybe how we could perhaps generalize maybe some of those phrases and clauses?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely we can generalize, and thank you for that. If the best way we can do it is through like experts like you. You can leave your comments on those specific maybe tell us how we can change it, how we can modify it, how we can revise it, and we definitely take into considerations. As I said, I have an engineering background, so I'm not really I'm not an expert in these. I sort of gathered this from different guides and regulations that I saw. So there might be specific, there might be not really relevant at the moment. So the best way we can address this is you tell us how we can revise that, how we can address these sort of comments and mistakes in this code of practice. Yeah.
What would be the best way for us to get those comments through to you guys at this phase?
I think via email.
Via email. So you can send me an email I think I can go back to the introductory part. So this is my email. You can send me an email, and if it's over the phone, or we can have sort of another sort of these workshop sessions. If it works for you, and we can sit down and go through the code of practice, and you can mention it just in real time, and I can make comments. Yeah.
Yeah, and sorry, just if I can make one other comment just around the biosecurity stuff as well, because I noticed it doesn't have its own kind of section within the code, but it is, from an aquaculture perspective, one of the most important things, one of the biggest risks to my area is how vessels are moving about between states, between farming regions, and the risk that poses. So it deserves its own focus section.
Definitely, thank you.
And then we can cover off on those other questions that were mentioned around biofouling management, because that's related as well.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Very good points. And I think, maybe just to take a slight step back, I think the reason for inclusion of some of these topics at all is that, the vessels have a role in, certain vessels have a role in handling of fish, and whilst of course others do not. So I suppose why we included these sections at all into the code of practice is that it is a bit of let's say a special, maybe a slightly unique function that aquaculture vessels can have, which other vessels, other sectors, won't be as exposed to. So we did think it was appropriate to have some content on these, on these topics in this code of practice document. Okay, so that was your comment. Thank you, Jasmine. Justin, well, maybe we can separately there get in contact in regards to some engagement in the WA aquaculture sector. Absolutely, keen for that. Let's see, Daniel, thanks again. So saying, well said, Jasmine, suggests there will be a number of these items. Yes, a guide to suggest that users could include those parameters for their own documentation might work. Yeah, well, I guess that's kind of what I was thinking. More general type notes in the code itself, and agreed. Okay, thanks, Daniel. And looks like Mike heading off. Thank you. Mike's suggesting he can respond with some comments. So maybe Said, he's left his email address here. We could maybe send him an email so he can then easily respond. As you've got on the screen there, Said, you've got your email address and my own. Maybe address any comments to the both of us, and we can action accordingly. Looking at the time, we're pretty much a couple of minutes away from closure. So I think it's been really valuable. So I'll maybe just ask if anyone has got any final questions or comments they'd like to raise from the audience. Okay, well, if not, I might say thank you to everyone who's joined, and maybe those who had to head off a bit earlier. Thank you very much for your time, your valuable contributions, your engagement with this project. Really appreciate it. And again, a special thank you to Said for all of his hard work over the last, it's come up to nearly 2 years now. Done a really good job, and really appreciate all your hard work. And I think it's gotten to a really good stage as to where we're up to. A few more things to follow up with now, which we really appreciate those comments from everybody who's raised any feedback. And I think we'll probably say good evening and thank you to everybody, and call it at that. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.